Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah. He called President Donald Trump the other day an idiot. Name calling of that sort probably didn't cause followers of the Middle East events to even take notice. But what it's worth noting is that in the same very diatribe, Nasrallah also referred to former President Barack Obama as a hypocrite. Comments like the ones made by Nasrallah are important tools for us to use in assessing how the new administration is perceived by its enemies. They also help us assess how the previous administration is being viewed now that our enemies have the luxury of 20/20 hindsight. While Nasrallah chose to use different rhetorical terms while differentiating between Trump and Obama, the reality is that the difference he expressed in attitude is absolutely nil. Nasrallah loves to make speeches, and his quotes are fodder for the Arabic and Muslim press. This Hezbollah leader is always on topic. He is the religious and political leader of Hezbollah, which means actually in English, the party of God. Every day, Hezbollah radio, TV, newspapers, websites are replete with Nasrallah's point of view. His comments fuel and energize his fighters, his followers, and also his donors. A little-known secret is that Nasrallah is almost never present at the events at which he speaks. His messages are piped in by video or taped and replayed. Sometimes he even makes use of live Skype simulcasts, so he can engage with his audience in an even question-answer prescripted, of course, question-answer setting. Nasrallah fears for his life. He almost never leaves his secured and secret bunker. Quite rightfully, he fears that Israel will try to assassinate him if he ventures out of his safe zone. Speculation is that they can use a drone to take him out or some other means to blow him up. Fear of death by Israel is a hallowed tradition for the leadership ranks among the enemies of Israel. Yasser Arafat, founding father of the Palestinian movement, was rumored to change locations every single night. And there are still conspiracy theories that Israel was responsible for his death by poisoning. Nasrallah is the heart and soul of Hezbollah. He almost single-handedly transformed a small band of terrorists into a well-trained pseudo-army, one that can function as a real army with command and control, planning, chain of command, and accountability. Hezbollah fighters use the weapons of an army such as tanks, armored personnel carriers, anti-aircraft weapons, computer technology, and the like. But unlike a regular regulation army, Hezbollah fighters can also cast off their uniforms and engage in terror attacks while hiding behind civilians. The statements about Trump and Obama were made while Nasrallah was speaking at the funeral of a friend. He spoke via live hookup from his secure bunker. About President Trump, Nasrallah said, quote, "When an idiot is sitting in the White House who glorifies in his stupidity, this marks the beginning of redemption." He said that Trump, quote, "exposed the true face of the American government, the ugly, oppressive, and racist one. Ever since he was elected, he revealed the true nature of the American government." And then Nasrallah went on to explain that Trump set hypocrisy aside. We thank him. And this is what Hassan Nasrallah had to say about the former president, President Barack Obama. What's new? The new thing is that previously there was a president who covered himself in hypocrisy and spoke beautiful words, but he invoked sanctions and supported wars like the one in Yemen that led thousands into starvation, supported dictatorships, and created ISIS to damage the religion of Islam. He also had a few choice words for former President Bush. At the risk of stating the obvious, Nasrallah's statements, his sentiments, prove how very much the United States is hated in certain parts of the world and by certain groups of people, especially groups like Hezbollah. Neither niceties nor pleasant disposition will convert or dissuade Hezbollah from their intended mission and preconceived notions. Hezbollah will never, can never, be a friend of the United States, no matter who the president may be, not today, not tomorrow, and they certainly weren't friends of the United States yesterday. Recognize that regardless of what the administration does, the United States and its leader will always be hated by groups like Hezbollah. Why? Because of what the United States represents, the values we hold dear. That includes freedom, equality, pluralism. They're despised by groups like Hezbollah. It is anathema to them that we actually accept to live with those with whom we disagree. In the eyes of Hezbollah, if you disagree, you are targeted for death. No questions asked. Hamas thinks along the same lines. Hamas just held an election. As with everything Hamas-related, it's fraught with controversy. Putting that aside, we can now say Hamas has a new head, and his name is Yahya Sinwar. This is bad news all around, for Israel, for the West, for Gaza, and even for Hamas. Sinwar is even more extreme than Hamas leadership in the past. First, and most importantly, he was involved in an Israeli prison release where he was swapped for the captured Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit. Yahya Sinwar is a free man because of an exchange, and yet he has put unrealistic and extreme preconditions on any swap with Israel. He's demanding that all 50 prisoners who were released for Shalit in 2014 and then rearrested after the kidnapping and murder of 3 Israeli teenagers, that they be released. And then he's demanding the release of dozens of other prisoners before he even will begin to talk about returning the 2 bodies of Israelis killed in the most recent Gaza operation, and the freeing of 2 Israelis who accidentally wandered into Gaza. These are non-starters for Israel. Even more dramatic and more dangerous is that Yahya Sinwar wants to rekindle relations with Iran. Previous Hamas leadership was interested in mending fences with Egypt. But moving towards Iran means Hamas will receive money and weapons that could have a huge impact on the safety of Israelis. Running to Iran is never a good sign when it comes to power and politics in the Middle East. Another hater of the West is, of course, ISIS. ISIS reports that Israeli drone struck and killed 5 ISIS members in Sinai. They were traveling in a car in the very northernmost section of the Sinai, almost in Gaza, just outside the city of Rafah. This was probably a response to ISIS's launching of rockets from Sinai into the southern port city of Eilat just over a week before the drone strike. ISIS claimed responsibility for the original rocket attack against Israel. They made an official statement and posted it and proudly boasted that it was in their operation of ISIS of the Sinai Peninsula. They said, or they wrote it on their website, quote, "A number of rockets were launched at Jewish centers in Eilat, known as Rashrash. The Jews and Crusaders should know that the war of the apostles will not save them in any way." Coming up next, points of view. Here's what some important voices have been talking about. We're only going to discuss one column today. Today's column is from the New York Times. This column is by the public editor of the New York Times. Her name is Liz Spade. Spade is the 6th editor, is at the intersection of Times readers and the Times journalists. Spade's job is to keep the New York Times honest. This piece was published on February 18th, 2017. It's entitled, "The Risk of Unnamed Sources, Unconvinced Readers." She begins by heaping great praise on the Times, and then she takes them to task in a serious way, but politely. Here's how Spade begins. The news emanating from Washington these past 2 weeks has been relentless, and the reporting on it impressive. There was the New York Times story on the nascent days of the White House, portraying top aides fumbling in the dark as they rethought their improv approach to governing. Then came coverage of a showdown that sent National Security Advisor Michael Flynn packing. That drama morphed into a scoopy Times article reporting that members of President Trump's campaign team had repeated contact with Russian intelligence officials before the election. For what reason? We don't know. This is what journalism should be: enterprising, essential, and intent on grasping what's well beyond reach, not just storifying early dawn tweets from the president or wailing from the press secretary's podium, but taking seriously the public service function of the media. Now Spade explains where the problem is. The stories relied on unnamed sources, and because of that, it is less convincing and even possibly untrue. Here's how she puts it. There was something else notable about these stories. All of them relied heavily, some entirely, on the reporting tactic many readers despise, the use of anonymous sources, presumably for fear of losing a job, a security clearance, access, or something else. The people interviewed did not want to be named, and so were assigned nebulous titles like government official, or congressional aid, or even more vaguely, those familiar with, the thing they were talking about. Now Spade shows how readers are skeptical and they need sources. She writes, several others came in after the gripping and deeply reported article by Glenn Thrush and Maggie Haberman, portraying the chaotic life in a fledgling White House. It begins with an omniscient description of aides in unfamiliar surroundings, a president watching TV in his bathrobe, and efforts to redo the Oval Office playbook. At paragraph 8, the article describes the numerous sources it relied on: interviews with dozens of government officials, congressional aides, former staff members, and other observers of the new administration, many of whom requested anonymity. Now she explains that there is a real problem with the sources. She then says that some of the inaccuracies are not germane to the story. Listen to what she says. It's not clear from the description, however, whether any of the sources had a first-hand account of the White House activity or what motives they might have for revealing information. After the article was published, the White House pushed back, as it often does, this time taking issue with the idea that Trump even owns a robe, the least newsworthy fact in the piece. Here Spade makes a terrible error. The fact that Trump does or does not own a robe is central to the point of truth and the article. It is one of those irrelevant tidbits that make the story interesting and actually make it memorable. Not newsworthy, but a significant part of storytelling. So if it was made up, it means that the emphasis was on the image and of the role of storytelling, not news. And honestly, that is deeply troubling, even more so because the public editor did not see the relevance and significance of news versus the creative aspects of storytelling. Coming up, commentary through cartoons where pictures tell the story. This week, let's focus on a cartoon controversy. The controversy was all over the media and was caused by the use of a cartoon in the New York Regents exam for global studies. The exam was administered on January 24th, 2017. The Regents are the standardized state exams that measure or evaluate students, schools, and the state with regard to knowledge and subject mastery. In this case, the cartoon was drawn by Chris Britt of the State Journal-Register. It depicts 3 Israeli soldiers. They are overweight, older, and slovenly. The soldiers are taking cover behind a table as they're being shot at from what looks to be Gaza. And the Israeli in the middle asks the question, or says the following: "I knew this peace table would come in handy someday." Admittedly, it's a little funny. The cartoon does not depict Israelis well at all. The students are then required to answer the following question: what is the main idea of the cartoon? And they have 4 options. Option number 1, peace talks have led to a ceasefire. Number 2, the conflict is near an end. 3, negotiations have failed. And 4, key groups have been brought to the peace table. In response to the uproar, the Regents said that there was no intention to besmirch anyone, and the author also said that there is no malice of intent. The quote from the New York State Department of Education was that the cartoon measures the student's ability to analyze a political cartoon, critically examine the cartoonist's point of view, and apply that. I do not deny that that was the intent, but the portrayal, was offensive. And indeed, later, the state regents apologized for what they did, and they said that more stringent reviews of the questions and material will take place in the future. This next cartoon is by Stephen Breen from the San Diego Union-Tribune. Breen has won 2 Pulitzer Prizes. This cartoon depicts the leader of North Korea, Kim Jong-un. He is 32 years old and has been in power as dictator since 2012, since he was 28 years old. He is every bit as unpredictable as his father. The major danger is, of course, North Korea is a nuclear power. We do not know what motivates him. This young dictator himself is a loose cannon, but he loves attention. He loves the internet, and more than anything else, He loves NBA professional basketball. This cartoon has the dictator waving to us, and in the background is a missile being shot into the air. Written on the missile is the word test. Most obvious in the picture is the red Trump-like hat that Kim Jong-un is wearing. And it reads, "Make America pay attention to me again." The idea is that the unconventional missile tests of North Korea are catching U.S. attention. The final cartoon is a pictoon, a combination of two pictures, and it was put together by Turning Point USA. It's a play on fake news. Nancy Pelosi, the Democratic congressional leader, is quoted saying, quote, "I believe in natural gas as a clean, cheap alternative to fossil fuels," unquote. Then Ben Stein, who's a comedian and economist, who was also an economic advisor to Ronald Reagan, says, quote, "Except that natural gas is a fossil fuel." Look, people make mistakes and misspeak, and the more they speak, the more they make mistakes. This was a simple mistake. You should note this aside, if it would have come out of the Trump administration, it most certainly would have become a major incident. People should calm down about these issues and about misspeaks. In a moment, my own perspective and a few predictions. It looks like one of the first things new U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson did was meet with his Russian counterpart, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. The meeting was reported by the Interfax news service, which quoted Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Mikhail Bogdanov. The two chief diplomats met in Germany. The coverage clearly articulated that the topic of their conversation was Syria and ISIS. This was an important test for Tillerson in his role as Secretary of State. He was extremely successful in that meeting. One of the most important parts of the meeting is that it all happened beneath the radar. The Secretary of State needs to be able to conduct secret meetings with leaders. That is combined with the more public parts of the job. If the Secretary is only public or mostly working in public, it becomes a standard modus operandi. If that happens, then secret, below-the-radar moves become very difficult. In addition, Vice President Michael Pence was in Europe explaining and describing Washington's policy. He was building bridges and making sense of all the questions that have emerged with the Trump presidency. He was received extremely well. This was critical, especially because many in Europe were worried and deeply concerned about Trump's rise to power. The White House meeting between President Donald Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was, at the very same time, both exciting and very boring. Exciting because it has been a very long time since an Israeli Prime Minister, especially Netanyahu, has been welcomed and received well as a guest at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Boring because there was no real new news coming out of the meeting. No news, no conflict, no new ground. In the end, that no news will turn into good news for everyone. The first meeting between a U.S. president and the sitting Israeli Prime Minister is normally a formality. The two leaders review basics and reaffirm the promise made by President Bush to Prime Minister Sharon to protect Israel. They get to know one another and make certain that they can pick up the phone and clear things up if and when it becomes necessary. In this case, Trump and Netanyahu are already friends. They skipped the formalities and got down to brass tacks, business, or as some will call it, tachlis. They probably spoke about Iran, ISIS, Syria, Turkey, and the cabal of negativism that swarms around each of them. They only briefly discussed Palestinian issues, although Trump said that he was not tied to the two-state solution and said that any option is on the table. They agreed that there is at present no Palestinian leader strong enough to broker the compromises necessary for negotiations and meaningful dialogue. They mentioned settlements, and President Trump reiterated that it was not helpful to make public pronouncements about such things. Settlements don't help, he said. They agreed to create an Israeli-U.S. committee on settlements. Not bad for Israel, not bad for the United States. Many people have never heard of PewDiePie. His real name is Felix Kjellberg, and he is the most watched person on YouTube, the most watched person ever. PewDiePie has 53 million subscribers, and his videos have been watched over 1 billion times. He's what you would call hot, and yet Disney just dropped him. PewDiePie was dropped because he had 8 videos that were overtly anti-Semitic. One video included 2 Indians unfurling a banner that read, "Kill the Jews." Another video had him saying Hitler was right. Kilberg said that it was all done in humor, but he understands that it could be misunderstood. That falls far shy of an apology. Disney did the right thing. There could be no tolerance for hatred, not even in humor. This artist was self-destructive. Disney was worth millions to him per year. But don't feel sorry for him. He ruined his own career. Terror threats against the organized Jewish community have risen. These threats do not appear to have been activated in any serious response, either on the part of the media or on the part of the Jewish community. The events were minimally covered in the press, especially the local press, in the cities where the terror threats took place. National and international press covered these threats, but did not extend their analysis to focusing on the threats themselves, how to approach these threats, how to educate the Jewish and non-Jewish communities about them and what to do. Over 3 separate days in January, on January 9th, the 18th, and 31st, there were 60 bomb threats called into 46 JCCs in 26 states and then another one in Canada. Some JCCs received several threats. The threat said that C4 has been placed in your building and a large number of Jews are going to be slaughtered. And then again on Monday, February 20th, 4 JCCs again received bomb threats. A national response is essential. After that, Ivanka Trump tweeted about the anti-Semitism. And then President Trump called the threats horrible and said anti-Semitism was horrible and must stop. Islam is not recognized in Italy. That means, unlike Christianity and Judaism, whose congregations and clergy are paid by the state, Islamic congregations and clergy are not paid by the state. Now, there's a move to register all Italian imams. And Italy's imams are now required to sermonize in Italian and sign a good citizenship statement. There's 1.4 million Muslims in Italy. They're the second largest religious community in the country. Italians are afraid of the trend overtaking Europe, where radical Islam is hijacking many countries. The solution Italian leadership has devised is called the National Pact for an Italian Islam. The idea is to integrate Islam into the modern state of Italy. It's ambitious, it's a big undertaking, but will it be successful? I don't know. Also in Europe, this time in France, Marine Le Pen, the national leader of National Front or Front National and contender for the president of France, said some very controversial things in an Israeli interview on Israeli television Channel 2. The Jewish media around the world have taken and been talking about this interview like you'd never believe, from the Jewish Chronicle in England to JTA in the United States. Le Pen said that Jews in France should stop wearing their kippah. She said they should wear hats instead. This is part of the battle against Islam, she said. She advocates the removal of all religious symbols. She said, honestly, the dangerous situation in which Jews in France live is such that those who walk with the kippah are in any case a minority because they are afraid. She said, but I mainly think the struggle against radical Islam should be a joint struggle and everyone should say, there, we're sacrificing something. Le Pen also said, maybe they will do it just wearing a hat, but it would be a step in the effort to stamp out radical Islam in France. Marine Le Pen is wrong. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquant piece of information. Did you know that the city of Rafah is both in Egypt and in Gaza? Rafah is divided in half, and many of the tunnels that connect Gaza and Egypt run from one home to another home in different parts of the city in 2 different countries. There are families, or better clans, that are linked on both sides. This has been the case since 1967, the Six-Day War. During that war, Israel conquered Gaza from Egypt. But the situation has not changed since Hamas took over Gaza in 2007. Egypt needs to protect its border and expends great efforts to do so. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.